She went to the tea shop to forget her overdue rent, not to become a target. 1 minute, Sienna was nobody, just a waitress invisible to the world. The next, the most feared woman in Chicago sat across from her, trembling beneath a mink coat, and whispered a plea that sounded more like a death sentence. "Pretend you're my son's fiancée, or we both die right now." She didn't know the son was Dante Valenti. She didn't know that saying yes was easy, but surviving the engagement would be the hardest thing she'd ever do. This is the story of how a lie became a war. It was a Tuesday, and Sienna typically didn't act like she had money on Tuesdays. Tuesday was usually the day she counted the tips from her double shift at Louis' diner and decided which utility bill could wait another month. But today was the anniversary of her mother's death, and tradition was a stubborn ghost. So Sienna sat in the back corner of the Gilded Leaf, a tea room on Michigan Avenue, where the air smelled of bergamot and old money. She was wearing her only good dress, a thrifted navy wrap dress that she'd steamed within an inch of its life, and sipping a cup of first flush Darjeeling that cost $12. $12. That was 3 hours of work after taxes. She stared out the frosted window, watching the Chicago wind whip snow against the glass. She was trying to feel elegant, trying to feel like a person who mattered when the bell above the door chimed. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It was a subtle change, like the air pressure dropping before a tornado. A woman walked in. She was in her 60s, elegant in a way that felt sharp, like cut glass. She wore a heavy black coat, oversized sunglasses, and a silk scarf tied over her silver hair. She didn't wait for the hostess. She scanned the room, her gaze darting frantically until it landed on Sienna. Sienna froze, her teacup halfway to her mouth. The woman rushed over, not walking so much as fleeing, and slid into the empty booth seat, directly across from Sienna. Up close, the elegance cracked. The woman was breathing hard, a sheen of sweat on her upper lip, despite the freezing temperature outside. "Excuse me," Sienna said, lowering her cup. "I think you have the wrong—" "Don't look at the door," the woman whispered. Her voice was guttural, steeped in a terror that made the hair on Sienna's arms stand up. "Pick up your teapot. Pour me a cup. Do it now." "What?" The woman reached across the table. Her hand, manicured and adorned with a diamond the size of a quail egg, gripped Sienna's wrist. Her grip was iron. "There are 2 men in grey trench coats by the entrance. They are here to kill me. If they see me alone, they will shoot. If they see me with my son's fiancée, they will hesitate. Hesitation buys us time." Sienna's heart hammered against her ribs. "Lady, I'm just a waitress. I don't know who you are." "I am Lucia Valenti," the woman hissed. The name dropped like a stone. Even working in a diner on the south side, Sienna knew the name. The Valentis weren't just a family. They were an institution. Construction, shipping, waste management, and bodies in the river. "Please," Lucia said, her eyes wet behind the dark glasses. "My son is 5 minutes away. Just pour the tea. Smile. Act like you know me. Act like you love him." Sienna looked past Lucia's shoulder. She couldn't help it. By the maitre d' stand, 2 men were scanning the room. One had a scar running through his eyebrow. The other kept his right hand buried deep inside his coat. They looked like sharks in a goldfish bowl. Sienna grabbed the teapot. Her hands shook, rattling the china, but she poured. "Good," Lucia breathed out. "Now ask me about the wedding venue. Ask me if I prefer the cathedral or the estate." "Do you—" Sienna's voice cracked. She cleared her throat. "Do you think the cathedral is too drafty for a winter wedding, Lucia?" Lucia forced a smile that looked painful. She reached out and patted Sienna's hand, angling her body so the men at the door could see the engagement ring on her own finger, but blocking their clear line of sight to her chest. "Oh, darling, the cathedral is timeless. Dante would want you to have the best. Dante Valenti. The capo. The man the tabloids called the Prince of Chicago, and the police called untouchable." "He's late," Lucia whispered, her smile fixed but her eyes darting to her watch. "He's never late." The men at the door took a step forward. The maitre d' tried to stop them, and the scarred man simply shoved him aside with a look that promised violence. They began to move through the tables, heading straight for the back corner. "They're coming!" Sienna whispered, panic rising in her throat like bile. "Lucia, they're coming!" "Keep smiling," Lucia commanded, though her own hand was trembling on the table. The men were 10 feet away. Sienna could see the dead look in their eyes. She braced herself, wondering if a teacup could stop a bullet, wondering if she would die here in her thrift store dress over a $12 tea. Then the front door smashed open. It wasn't a bell chime this time. It was a slam. A gust of wind and snow swirled into the room, followed by a figure that seemed to suck all the light out of the space. He was tall, over 6'3", wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Sienna's life earnings. His hair was black, swept back, and his face was a study in severe angles, eye cheekbones, a jaw that could cut stone, and eyes that were the color of freezing water. Dante Valenti. He didn't run. He walked with a terrifying, predatory fluidity. He saw the 2 men in grey coats instantly. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply unbuttoned his suit jacket, revealing the shoulder holster beneath, and locked eyes with them. Behind him, 3 more men, massive hulking bodyguards, poured into the shop. The men in grey froze. They were outnumbered. The scarred man looked at Dante, then at Lucia, and finally at Sienna. He sneered, turned on his heel, and walked out. The tension in the room didn't break. It just shifted focus. Dante marched to the table. He looked at his mother, noting her pale skin. Then his gaze snapped to Sienna. It felt like being X-rayed. He looked at her cheap dress, her trembling hands, the half-empty cup of tea. "Mother." His voice was a deep baritone, smooth but vibrating with suppressed rage. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Dante," Lucia said, collapsing back against the booth seat, the adrenaline fading. "Thanks to her." Dante looked at Sienna again. His eyes narrowed. "Who is she?" "She's your fiancée," Lucia said, her voice regaining some of its steel. "At least she was for the last 10 minutes. The Santoro hitmen were going to clip me, Dante. They hesitated because they were confused. They didn't know who she was." Dante stared at Sienna. Silence stretched heavy and suffocating. Sienna realized she was holding her breath. "Get up," Dante said to Sienna. It wasn't a request. I haven't paid," Sienna stammered, terrified. Dante reached into his pocket, pulled out a money clip, and threw a $100 bill onto the table without looking at it. "You have now. Let's go." Go where?" Sienna asked, shrinking back. "I helped her. I did what she asked. I just want to go home." Dante leaned down, placing both hands on the table, trapping her in the booth. Up close, he smelled of expensive cologne tobacco and gunpowder. "The Santoro family just saw your face sitting across from my mother. They saw you wearing a ring." He looked at her bare hand, then glared at his mother. "I gave her my backup ring." Lucia lied, smoothly sliding a massive emerald ring off her pinky and shoving it across the table under her napkin. Dante didn't blink. He looked back at Sienna. They think you are mine, which means 5 minutes after you walk out that door alone, they will grab you. They will torture you to find out what you know about my family, and when you tell them you know nothing, they will kill you just to send me a message. Sienna felt the blood drain from her face. You're joking. I never joke, Dante said coldly. You walked into this life the moment you poured that tea. Sweetheart, now get in the car or stay here and die. It's your choice. Sienna looked at the door where the killers had just left. She looked at Dante's outstretched hand, large, scarred, and demanding. She took it. The ride to the Valenti estate was silent. Sienna sat in the back of a black armored SUV, squeezed between Dante and the window. Lucia sat opposite them, sipping water from a crystal bottle she'd pulled from a hidden compartment. Sienna watched the city blur by. They were heading north toward the wealthy enclaves of Lake Forest, far away from her studio apartment in Pilsen. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from her landlord. Great. Give me your phone, Dante said. Sienna jumped. What, why? GPS tracker. Malware. Or maybe you're just dumb enough to post a selfie, Dante said, holding out his hand. I need it. My dad calls me on this phone, Sienna protested, clutching the cracked iPhone to her chest. Dante snatched it from her hand with effortless speed. He rolled down the window and threw it onto the highway. Hey, Sienna screamed, lunging for the window. That was my life, my photos, my contacts. I'll buy you a new life, Dante said, rolling the window up as if he'd just tossed a gum wrapper. One that doesn't lead Rocco Santoro to my front door. Sienna slumped back, angry tears stinging her eyes. You have no right. I have every right. You're my responsibility now, he muttered, looking away. They arrived at the estate 20 minutes later. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress. High stone walls, iron gates that groaned open, and armed guards patrolling the perimeter with German shepherds. The house itself was a sprawling limestone mansion that looked cold and imposing against the grey sky. Dante ushered them into a library that smelled of leather and cigar smoke. He slammed the heavy oak doors shut and turned on his mother. What were you thinking, Lucia? He roared. The calm facade dropped. He was terrifyingly loud. Going to the city alone, without security, with the peace treaty hanging by a thread. I needed air, Dante, Lucia shouted back, standing her ground. I am not a prisoner in my own city, and I knew the Santoros were making a move. I wanted to draw them out. By using a civilian as a human shield. Dante pointed a finger at Sienna, who was trying to blend into a bookshelf. Look at her. She's terrified. She's a waitress, Mother. I saw her apron in her purse. She's not built for this. She held her own, Lucia argued. She poured the tea without spilling a drop while a gun was pointed at her back. She has potential. Potential for what, a closed casket? Dante ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. The Santoros saw her. Word will spread by midnight. The commission will be asking who she is. If I say she's a nobody, they'll think I'm weak, that I let my mother dine with strangers while assassins circled. If I say she's a decoy, they'll kill her to prove a point. He stopped pacing and turned to Sienna. He walked over slowly, inspecting her again. He looked at her worn boots, the fraying hem of her coat, the dark circles under her eyes. What is your name? He asked, his voice quieter now. Sienna, she whispered. Sienna Moretti. Moretti, he repeated, tasting the syllables. Italian. My grandfather was, from Sicily. I've never been. Dante nodded. He walked behind his massive mahogany desk and sat down. He pulled a checkbook from a drawer. "How much?" he asked. "Excuse me. How much to disappear? I can set you up in Montana. New name, new ID, a cabin in the woods. You leave tonight." Sienna thought about it. Montana. Safety. No landlord calling. But then she thought of her father. He was in a state-run nursing home in the suburbs battling early onset dementia. If she left, he'd be alone. He'd be a ward of the state. He would die wondering where his little girl went. "I can't leave," Sienna said, her voice shaking but firm. Dante paused, pen hovering over the check. "Why?" "My father. He's sick. I'm his only contact. If I disappear, he has no one." Dante studied her. For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe? Or perhaps just calculation. He closed the checkbook. "Then we have a problem, Sienna Moretti. Because you cannot stay in Chicago as a waitress. You are a target." He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. "So we play the hand my mother dealt us." "What does that mean? The Santoros think you're my fiancée. So you're going to be my fiancée." Sienna laughed. It was a hysterical, dry sound. "I'm a waitress who makes tips on pancakes. This isn't a rom-com. It's insane." "It's survival," Dante corrected. "My family is being challenged by the board of elders. They think I'm too young, too reckless. They want me to settle down to show stability. A fiancé gives me that. It buys me time to root out the traitor in my organization and crush the Santoros." He stood up and walked around the desk, stopping inches from her. "Here is the deal. You live here. You wear the clothes I buy. You attend the galas I tell you to. You smile at the men who want to kill me, and you pretend to adore me. In exchange, I pay off all your debts." Sienna swallowed. "I have student loans." "Gone." "My father's medical bills, they're high. Paid in full. I'll move him to the best private facility in the state. Private nurses, 24-hour care. He'll live like a king." Sienna's breath hitched. That was the one thing she couldn't give him the best care. She was drowning in debt, trying to keep him comfortable. "How long?" she asked. 6 months, Dante said. "Or until the Santoros are dead. Whichever comes first. And if I say no, then I open that door," Dante said, gesturing to the exit. "You walk out. I give you $10,000 cash. You run. But I can't promise the Santoros won't find you before you reach the train station." It wasn't a choice. It was an ultimatum wrapped in silk. Sienna looked at Lucia, who was watching with a strange expression, guilt mixed with triumph. She looked at Dante, the beautiful, dangerous monster, offering to save her father in exchange for her soul. 6 months, Sienna said. 6 months, Dante agreed. He held out his hand. "Welcome to the family, Sienna." She shook his hand. His skin was rough, his grip warm. "One rule," Dante added, not letting go of her hand. "This is business. Do not fall in love with me. I am not a hero. I destroy everything I touch. If you catch feelings, you're on your own." Sienna pulled her hand away, lifting her chin. "Don't worry, Mr. Valenti. You're not my type." Dante's lip quirked upward. A micro smile. It made him look devastatingly handsome. "We'll see," he said. "Show her to the guest wing. Tonight we have dinner with the underbosses. Get ready, fiancé. The show starts now." Sienna thought the hardest part of her day had been facing down hitmen over Earl Grey tea. She was wrong. The hardest part was enduring Lucia Valenti's walk-in closet. 2 hours before dinner, Lucia had dragged Sienna upstairs to a room larger than Sienna's entire apartment. It was filled with racks of designer clothing, shelves of shoes that looked like medieval torture devices gilded in gold, and the smell of lavender sachets that cost more than a car payment. Lucia wasn't playing fairy godmother. She was a general outfitting a soldier for war. "Too frumpy," Lucia muttered, tossing a Chanel blazer aside. "Too desperate," she said, discarding a red sequined number. She circled Sienna like a shark, pinching the fabric of her thrift store dress with disdain. "You have a good structure. We need to emphasize that. You need to look expensive, untouchable, and completely devoted to my son. The men coming tonight need to believe that Dante Valenti, a man who trusts no one, handed his heart to you." Lucia finally pulled out an emerald green silk gown. It was backless with a neckline that plunged dangerously low and a slit that rode high up her thigh. It was a dress designed to stop conversations. "Put it on," Lucia commanded. When Sienna stepped out of the changing alcove, she didn't recognize herself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The dress fit like a second skin, shimmering like liquid jade. Her hair, usually messy from a long shift, had been sleeked back into an elegant, severe bun by Lucia's personal stylist. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting her cheekbones and making her eyes look enormous and slightly dangerous. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like someone who could ruin your life with a phone call. "Adequate," Lucia said, which Sienna guessed was high praise. A knock on the door made them both turn. Dante entered. He had changed into a fresh black suit, this one even more sharply tailored than the last. He stopped dead when he saw Sienna. His eyes raked over her, from the sleek hair to the emerald silk clinging to her hips. For a fraction of a second, the cold mask slipped. There was heat in his gaze, a raw, masculine appreciation that made Sienna's breath catch in her throat. Then the mask slammed back into place. "You'll do," he said curtly. He walked over and pulled a velvet box from his pocket. He snapped it open. Inside sat a diamond ring so large it looked vulgar. It was an emerald cut, flanked by baguettes set in platinum. "Give me your hand," he demanded. Sienna offered her trembling left hand. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was heavy. It felt like a shackle. "Listen to me," Dante said, his voice low and urgent, his grip on her hand tightening. "Tonight you are on stage. The men downstairs are my capos, my captains. They are loyal, but they are hungry wolves. If they sense weakness in me, they will tear me apart. You are my weakness now." "What's the story?" Sienna whispered, staring at the diamond. "We met 6 months ago at a gallery opening in River North. I was buying a sculpture. You were admiring it. It was instant. You don't know the specifics of my business, just that I'm in logistics and construction. You're fiercely protective of me. You hate the violence, but you love the man." He leaned in close, his breath ghosting against her ear. "Look at me when I speak. Touch my arm. Laugh at my jokes even if they aren't funny. Selling this lie is the only thing keeping you alive tonight. Do you understand?" "Yes," she breathed. "Good. Let's go feed the wolves." The dining room was cavernous, dominated by a 20-foot mahogany table. 6 men sat around it, nursing glasses of dark liquor. When Dante entered with Sienna on his arm, the room went silent. 6 pairs of hard, calculating eyes fixed on her. Dante made the introductions smoothly, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, a gesture that felt both protective and controlling. "Gentlemen, this is Sienna, my fiancée." The word hung in the air. There were murmurs of congratulations, none of them sounding sincere. Sienna felt like a lamb dressed in silk presented to a pack of hyenas. She was seated next to Dante, directly across from a man named Sal Russo. Sal was huge, with a neck thick with muscle and a nose that had been broken at least 3 times. He was the underboss who controlled the West Side docks, a man notorious for his brutality. Throughout the first course, Sal stared at Sienna, while chewing his prosciutto with an open mouth. "So, Sienna," Sal rumbled, pointing his fork at her. "You're the one who finally snagged the prince, huh?" We didn't even know he was looking. Love happens when you least expect it. "Sal," Sienna said, trying to keep her voice steady. She rested her hand on Dante's forearm, feeling the rigid muscle beneath the expensive suit fabric. "Is that right?" Sal smirked. "And what do you do, sweetheart, besides look pretty in expensive dresses?" The table went quiet. It was a test, a direct challenge. Dante shifted beside her. He was about to intervene to cut Sal down, but Sienna squeezed his arm, silencing him. She knew how to handle belligerent drunks at the diner. This was just a wealthier version. She picked up her wine glass, took a slow sip, and looked Sal dead in the eye. "I manage things, Sal. Difficult things, just like Dante does." She lied smoothly, channeling the attitude of every entitled rich woman she'd ever waited on. "And frankly, I find that question a little boring for a man of your reputation. Surely you have more interesting things to discuss than my wardrobe." Sal blinked. He wasn't used to women talking back. He let out a barking laugh that sounded like gravel in a blender. "She's got fire, boss." Sal slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "I like her better than those sculpted bimbos you usually run with." "To the future, Mrs. Valenti." He raised his glass. The tension in the room broke. The other men raised their glasses, the toast echoing around the table. Dante leaned in close to Sienna, under the pretense of kissing her cheek. "Not bad for a waitress," he murmured. His lips brushed her skin, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "But don't get cocky." Sal laughs now. "Tomorrow he might decide you're a liability and try to put you in the trunk of a car. The test never ends, Sienna." A week passed. Sienna learned that luxury could be a prison. The Valenti estate was magnificent, but it was a gilded cage. She had a suite of rooms that were larger than her father's old house. She had staff who catered to her every whim, bringing her espresso in bed and drawing rose-petal baths. But she couldn't leave the grounds without an armed escort. Her phone was monitored. Dante had given her a new encrypted one. Every corner of the estate outside of the bedrooms and bathrooms had security cameras. She felt watched, analyzed, and judged every second of the day. Dante kept his word, though. 3 days in, he drove her to the new facility, where her father had been moved. It was called Cedar Grove, and it looked more like a 5-star resort than a nursing home. Her father, Marco, was in a private suite with a view of a manicured garden. He had 2 private nurses watching him around the clock. When Sienna walked in, her father was sitting in a plush armchair, listening to old Italian opera records. He looked cleaner, healthier than he had in months. "Papa," Sienna whispered. Marco looked up. His eyes, often cloudy with confusion, cleared for a moment. "Sienna, Principessa." She rushed over and hugged him, burying her face in his shoulder. He smelled of expensive soap, not the institutional bleach of the state home. Dante stood in the doorway watching. He didn't enter the room. He just leaned against the frame, arms, crossed his expression unreadable as he watched Sienna weep with relief. When she came out an hour later, her eyes red. Dante was waiting by the car. "Is it satisfactory?" he asked, his voice businesslike. It's incredible," Sienna said, wiping her eyes. "Thank you. I don't know how to—" "Don't thank me." He cut her off sharply. "It's a transaction. You're holding up your end of the bargain. I'm holding up mine. That's all this is." He seemed determined to keep a wall between them to remind them both that this was just business. But back at the estate, the tension in the house was growing. They were living together, pretending to be in love for the staff and the guards. But when the doors closed, they were strangers sharing a roof. Sienna was bored and restless. She was used to working double shifts on her feet, not lounging by an indoor pool waiting for a man to tell her what to do. One night, unable to sleep, Sienna went down to the massive stainless steel kitchen to find some herbal tea. She was wearing silk pajamas that Lucia had bought her far too sheer for her comfort. She turned the corner and nearly collided with Dante. He was shirtless, wearing only grey sweatpants. Sienna froze. It was the first time she'd seen him not in a suit. He was terrifyingly built. His torso was a road map of muscle and scars, knife wounds, what looked like a graze from a bullet on his ribs, and other older marks. He was drinking water straight from a pitcher. He lowered it slowly, his eyes traveling over her sheer pajamas in the dim kitchen light. The air between them suddenly felt thick enough to choke on. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. "It's too quiet here," Sienna said, crossing her arms over her chest, conscious of how little she was wearing. "I'm used to city noise. Sirens, trucks." "The quiet is expensive," Dante said, stepping closer. He smelled of soap and that underlying scent of danger that seemed to cling to him. "It means no one is shooting at the house tonight." "Do you ever turn it off?" she asked, looking up at him. "The paranoia, the need to control everything and—" "If I turn it off, people die," he said simply. He was standing too close now. Sienna could feel the heat radiating off his bare skin. He reached out his hand, hovering near her face. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he was going to cup her cheek. She found herself leaning in slightly, a traitorous impulse to close the distance between them. The sheer magnetism of the man was overwhelming. His fingers brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His eyes dropped to her lips. "You shouldn't be wandering around down here," he murmured. His voice dropped an octave. "You don't know what you're doing to the guards. To me." Sienna's heart hammered. "Dante!" He flinched at his name. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned, his jaw tightening. The ice returned to his eyes. "Go to bed, Sienna," he commanded harshly, turning his back on her to face the sink. "Remember the rule. Don't make this complicated." Shaking, humiliated and confusingly aroused, Sienna fled back to her room. The next morning, the illusion of safety shattered completely. Sienna was having breakfast on the patio when the head of security, a grim-faced man named Elias, walked over carrying a small cardboard box. He was wearing latex gloves. "Miss Moretti," Elias said gravely. "This was found at the service gate this morning. No return address. It was addressed to you." Sienna frowned, putting down her coffee cup. "For me, how?" Elias set the box on the table. He opened the flaps with a penknife. Sienna looked inside and screamed, scrambling backward out of her chair. Inside the box, resting on a bed of black tissue paper, was a small yellow canary. Its neck was broken, its head twisted at an unnatural angle. Beneath the dead bird was a simple white index card with a single line typed in the center. "Sing for him, little bird." "We're listening," Dante burst onto the patio seconds later, gun drawn, having heard the scream. He saw the box, saw Sienna shaking against the stone railing. He holstered the gun and walked over to the box. His face went impossibly dark. The fury radiating off him was palpable. "Elias!" Dante snarled, his voice a low rumble of coming violence. "How did this get past the perimeter? We're reviewing footage now, boss. It must have been a drone drop during the shift change." Dante looked at Sienna. She was pale, her eyes wide with terror. The reality of her situation had just landed on her breakfast table. This wasn't a game anymore. The Santoros knew exactly who she was, and they knew where she lived. Dante walked over to her. He didn't offer comfort. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip almost painful, forcing her to look at him. "They know," he said grimly. "The lie is already leaking. You wanted out of this house, Sienna. You wanted freedom. Forget it. You aren't leaving this estate again until every Santoro who can hold a gun is dead." The dead canary was a message, but Dante Valenti's response was a declaration of war. Most men would have locked the estate down, buried their loved ones in a bunker, and waited for the storm to pass. Dante did the opposite. He walked into Sienna's room 2 hours after the box arrived, threw a garment bag onto the bed, and announced, "We're going out." Sienna was sitting on the edge of the bed, still hugging her knees. She looked up at him, incredulous. "Are you insane? They just sent a dead bird to my breakfast table. They know where we live." "Exactly," Dante said, adjusting his cufflinks. He was vibrating with a cold, terrifying energy. "They want us afraid. They want me to hide you away. If I hide you, I prove you are a weakness. If I parade you in front of the city's elite tonight, I prove you are a queen. And you don't touch a queen without starting a war that burns the whole kingdom down." "Where are we going?" Sienna asked, her voice trembling. "The mayor's charity ball at the Drake Hotel. Everyone will be there. The politicians, the police commissioner, and Rocco Santoro." Sienna stood up, anger flaring through her fear. "You want to use me as bait, again?" Dante crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't touch her, but he loomed over her, his presence consuming the air in the room. "Not bait, Sienna. A shield. The Santoros won't move on you in a room full of federal judges and cameras. It is the safest place you can be tonight. But you have to sell it. You have to look at Rocco Santoro and laugh in his face." He pointed to the garment bag. "Wear the red one. It signals blood. Let them know we aren't afraid to spill it." The Drake Hotel was a palace of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. The ballroom was packed with Chicago's power players. When Dante and Sienna walked in, the conversation didn't just stop, it evaporated. Sienna wore a gown of crimson velvet that hugged every curve off the shoulder with a slit that went up to her hip. Around her neck sat a diamond necklace that Lucia had pulled from a safe, a Valenti heirloom, worth more than the building Sienna lived in. Dante's hand was a vice on her lower back. He guided her through the crowd, nodding to judges and shaking hands with aldermen. He played the part of the doting fiancé, perfectly whispering in her ear, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "Relax," he murmured as they grabbed champagne. "Your pulse is visible in your neck." "Maybe because I'm waiting for a sniper," she hissed back, smiling brilliantly at a passing senator. "No snipers, just sharks." Dante's eyes hardened. 3 o'clock. Sienna turned slightly. Standing near the orchestra was a man who looked like he was carved out of rot. Rocco Santoro was shorter than Dante, wider, with slicked-back graying hair and a smile that didn't reach his dead black eyes. He was holding court with a group of nervous-looking businessmen. He saw them. He excused himself and walked straight toward them. "Dante," Rocco said, his voice like oil sliding over gravel. "And the lovely fiancée. I didn't think we'd see you tonight. Heard you had some pest control issues at the estate this morning." Sienna felt Dante's muscles coil beneath his suit jacket. The threat was blatant. "Just a little bird, Rocco," Dante said, his voice bored. "My cat took care of it. Nature is cruel, isn't it?" Rocco chuckled, but his eyes stayed on Sienna. He stepped too close, invading her personal space. He smelled of heavy musk and stale cigars. "You're a brave girl," Rocco whispered to her, ignoring Dante. "But tell me, sweetheart, does a waitress from Pilsen know how to swim? The Chicago River is very cold this time of year." Sienna froze. He knew. He knew exactly where she came from. The Fiancée cover was blown. He was just toying with them now, waiting for the right moment to strike. Panic flared in her chest. She opened her mouth to speak, to stammer, to do something, but Dante moved. He didn't hit Rocco. That would have caused a scene. Instead, Dante stepped between them, blocking Rocco's view of her completely. He grabbed Sienna's hand and pulled her flush against his chest. "The music is starting," Dante said, his voice loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "I believe this is our song, darling." He swept her onto the dance floor before she could protest. The orchestra began a waltz. Dante held her tight, moving them into the center of the room, surrounded by spinning couples. "He knows," Sienna whispered frantically, clutching Dante's lapels. "Dante, he knows I'm a waitress. He whispered it to me." "I know he knows," Dante said, calmly spinning her. "He's bluffing. He suspects, but he doesn't know no. He's trying to rattle you to see if you crack. If you crack, he confirms it." "I'm cracking, Dante. I'm cracking right now." "No, you're not." Dante stopped moving. They were in the dead center of the ballroom. Hundreds of eyes were on them. He looked down at her, and for the first time the calculation was gone from his eyes. There was only intensity, a dark, desperate gravity. "Look at me," he commanded. "Forget Rocco. Forget the hit men. Forget the lie. Right now it's just you and me. I have you. I will not let them touch you." He lowered his head. "Kiss me," he whispered. "Make him believe it. Make me believe it." Sienna didn't think. She acted on instinct. She rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. It was supposed to be a performance. It was supposed to be a show for the cameras and the killers watching from the sidelines. But the moment their lips touched, the world tilted on its axis. Dante didn't kiss like a gentleman. He kissed like a starving man. His hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, deepening the kiss until it was bordering on scandalous. It was possessive raw and terrifyingly real. Sienna felt a jolt of electricity zip through her veins. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, forgetting the crowd, forgetting the danger. For 10 seconds, they weren't a waitress and a mob boss. They were two people clinging to each other in the eye of a hurricane. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Dante rested his forehead against hers. His eyes were blown wide, dark and hazy. "Okay." He rasped, his voice unsteady. "I think they're convinced." Sienna stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She realized with a sinking dread that the rule "do not fall in love" was already broken. The spell broke the moment they stepped out of the hotel. The cold Chicago wind hit them like a physical blow. The valet brought Dante's armored black sedan around. Dante tipped him, ushered Sienna into the passenger seat, and got behind the wheel himself. He had dismissed the driver earlier, saying he wanted privacy with his fiancée. In reality, he didn't trust anyone else to drive them tonight. They pulled out onto Lakeshore Drive. The lake was a black void to their right, the city skyline a wall of light to their left. "That kiss." Sienna started staring out the window, unable to look at him. "Don't analyze it," Dante said sharply, checking his rear-view mirror. "It was necessary. It felt like more than necessary." "Sienna, drop it." His eyes flicked to the mirror again. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We have company." Sienna turned in her seat. Two black SUVs were weaving through traffic behind them, running red lights, closing the distance fast. "Santoro." "Unless the fan club got aggressive," Dante muttered. He slammed his foot on the gas. The engine roared, and the sedan surged forward, pinning Sienna to her seat. "Hold on!" Dante yelled. The first SUV clipped their rear bumper. The sedan fishtailed on the icy asphalt. Dante corrected the spin with a curse, wrestling the heavy car back into the lane. A gunshot cracked a loud, dry pop, and a spiderweb of cracks appeared on the bulletproof glass of Sienna's window. Sienna screamed, ducking down. "They're shooting at us! Stay down!" Dante shouted. He swerved violently to the right, taking an exit ramp at 60 miles per hour. The tires screeched, smoking against the pavement. They were in the industrial district now, a maze of old warehouses and closed factories. This was Dante's turf, but the SUVs were relentless. Another shot rang out. This one didn't hit the glass. It punched through the metal of the door. Dante hissed in pain, his body jerking. "Dante!" Sienna cried out. "I'm fine," he gritted out. He took a sharp left into a narrow alleyway, scraping the side of the expensive car against a brick wall. He killed the headlights. The car plunged into darkness. He drove blind for 100 yards, then slammed on the brakes behind a rusted dumpster. "Out!" he ordered, his voice strained. "We have to move on foot. They'll block the alley." Sienna scrambled out. The cold bit through her thin dress instantly. Dante was already out checking the clip of his handgun. In the dim light of a distant street lamp, Sienna saw it. Blood. It was soaking through the shoulder of his suit jacket, black on black, dripping down his sleeve. "You're hit," she gasped. "Graze," he lied. "Come on." He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a nondescript metal door in the side of an abandoned factory. He punched a code into a keypad, 2099. The light turned green. The door clicked open. They spilled inside Dante, locking it, dead-bolting it behind them. It wasn't a factory inside, it was a safe house. A single-room apartment sparse with a medical cot, a secure phone line, and a cabinet full of weapons and supplies. Dante slumped against the door, sliding down until he hit the floor. He dropped the gun. His face was grey. "Dante!" Sienna fell to her knees beside him. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the stark reality of the blood pooling on the floor. "First aid kit. Under the sink," he wheezed. "Get the whiskey, too." Sienna scrambled. She ripped the kit open, her hands shaking so hard she dropped the scissors. "Focus, Sienna. You've patched up dishwashers who cut their hands. This is just deeper." She ran back to him. "I need to cut the jacket off." "Do it. It's ruined anyway." She sheared through the expensive fabric. The wound was ugly, a gouge across his deltoid. It wasn't life-threatening, but he was losing blood fast. "This is going to hurt," she warned, pouring whiskey over the wound to disinfect it. Dante roared, a guttural sound of pain, his head thumping back against the door. He squeezed his eyes shut, his teeth gritted. I'm sorry, Sienna sobbed, pressing gauze into the wound. She began to wrap it tight, using the pressure to stop the bleeding. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was their ragged breathing. Finally, the bleeding slowed. Sienna taped the bandage off. She sat back on her heels, her hands covered in his blood, her red dress stained darker. Dante opened his eyes. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the terror, the blood on her hands, the ruin of her beautiful dress. "You should have run," he whispered, "when I gave you the check that first day. You should have taken the money." "I couldn't leave my dad," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I would have taken care of him," Dante said softly. "I wouldn't have let him rot." "Why?" Sienna asked. "Why do you care? You're supposed to be a monster, Dante. Monsters don't pay for nursing homes for strangers." Dante let out a bitter laugh, wincing as his shoulder shifted. "I'm not a monster, Sienna. I'm a janitor. I clean up the messes my father made. I keep the city from burning. And sometimes I get burned." He reached out with his good arm. His hand, usually so commanding, was trembling slightly. He touched her cheek, smearing a tiny trace of his own blood on her skin. It looked like war paint. "You were amazing tonight," he said. "In the ballroom, in the car. You didn't freeze. I was terrified. But you didn't freeze. That's the difference." His thumb traced her lower lip. "That kiss." Sienna's breath hitched. "You said not to analyze it." "I lied," Dante murmured. His gaze dropped to her mouth. The air in the cold safe house suddenly felt scorching hot. The danger outside the Santoros, the hit men, the politics faded away. There was only the smell of whiskey copper and him. "I think," Dante said, his voice rough, "that I am failing to follow my own rules." Sienna leaned into his touch. "Then break them." Dante didn't wait. He pulled her down to him. This time there was no audience, no cameras, no strategy. He kissed her with a desperate hunger tasting of pain and whiskey. Sienna kissed him back, pouring all her fear and adrenaline into the embrace. She was no longer pretending, and she knew with terrifying certainty that he wasn't either. They were in the middle of a war, hiding in a concrete box, bleeding and hunted, and she had never felt more alive. But just as Dante's hand slid to the back of her neck, deepening the kiss, a heavy thud echoed from the heavy steel door behind his back. Then another. Someone was trying to batter down the door. Dante pulled away instantly, the lover vanishing, the killer returning. He grabbed his gun from the floor with his good hand and struggled to his feet. "Get behind the cot," he ordered, his voice cold as ice. "It seems Rocco has a tracker on my car." He aimed the gun at the door. "Sienna," he said, not looking back. "If they get in, don't let them take you alive. There is a spare gun in the cabinet. Use it." Sienna scrambled for the cabinet, grabbing the cold steel of a revolver. She pointed it at the door, her hands shaking, standing side by side with the King of Chicago. The door hinges groaned. "Together," she whispered. Dante glanced at her, a fierce pride in his eyes. "Together!" The door exploded inward. The heavy steel door didn't just open. It exploded inward, showering the safe house with concrete dust. Dante didn't hesitate. Even bleeding and barely conscious, he raised his gun. Sienna gripped the revolver with both hands, her heart hammering against her ribs, ready to fire at the first shadow that moved. "Cease fire, boss, it's us." The voice wasn't Rocco Santoro's gravelly growl. It was Elias Dante's head of security. Dante lowered his weapon an inch, his chest heaving. "Identify an Elias," the voice called out. "And your mother." The smoke cleared, revealing a surreal sight. Stepping over the twisted metal debris was Lucia Valenti, She was dressed in a pristine white mink coat, clutching a sleek, silenced pistol in her gloved hand. She looked less like she was walking into a crime scene and more like she was arriving for the opera. "Lucia," Sienna gasped, lowering her weapon. Lucia surveyed the room, the blood pooling on the floor, the open first aid kit, and the fierce determination on Sienna's face. A slow, terrifying smile curved her lips. "You handled yourself well, child," Lucia said calmly. She glanced at her son. "Stop bleeding on the floor, Dante. It's undignified." "You were supposed to be in the panic room," Dante gritted out, sliding down the wall as his adrenaline crashed. "How did you find us? How did you know?" "I knew because I planned it," Lucia confessed, holstering her pistol. "I knew Rocco put a tracker on your car. I let him keep it there." Sienna froze. "What?" "I needed a distraction," Lucia said, checking her manicure, as if discussing the weather. "I needed Rocco to send his best men chasing the prince and his fiancée through the city. While his hit squad was busy shooting at you on the highway, Elias and I paid a visit to Rocco's townhouse. He was surprisingly unguarded." "Rocco?" Dante asked, his voice rough. "Dead," Lucia said simply. "The war is over, Dante. I ended it while you were playing action hero." "We were bait," Sienna whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "You used us as bait." "I used you to win." Lucia corrected her eyes, softening just a fraction as she looked at Sienna. "And you didn't run. You didn't hide. You patched him up and picked up a gun. Perhaps my instincts were right about you after all." 3 days later, the private suite at Northwestern Memorial Hospital was silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Sienna stood by the window, watching the snow fall over Chicago. Behind her, Dante sat up in bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged, a thick envelope resting on his lap. "Come here," he said quietly. Sienna walked over. Dante held out the envelope. "This is your freedom," he said. "The contract is void. Rocco is dead. Inside is a deed to a house in Lake Forest and a check for $50 million. Enough to care for your father forever. Enough to disappear." Sienna took the envelope. It was heavy. It was the solution to every problem she'd ever had. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice tight. "I take the money, and I leave." "That was the deal," Dante said, staring at the wall, refusing to meet her eyes. "You did your job. You were the perfect fiancé. Now you go back to being safe." "Safe," Sienna repeated. She looked at the envelope. Then she looked at the man who had kissed her in a ballroom to save her life. She thought about the adrenaline, the fear, and the undeniable fire between them. Slowly, deliberately, she tore the envelope in half. Dante's head snapped toward her. "What are you doing?" She tore it again, letting the pieces rain down like confetti. "You can't buy me off, Dante," she said defiantly. "I'm not an employee anymore. My father told me he used to drive trucks for your family in the 80s. He said the Valentines take care of their own. Well, I'm one of your own now." "Sienna, I am a target." Dante snapped, his composure cracking. "I live in a world of violence. I am trying to save you from it, because I can't lose you." "You won't lose me," Sienna said, stepping closer and taking his hand. "I faced down hitmen. I pulled a bullet out of your shoulder. I'm not a porcelain doll, Dante. I'm tougher than you think." Dante looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the steel behind her beauty. He realized he could command armies, but he would never win an argument with this woman. He reached into the drawer of the bedside table. He didn't pull out money this time. He pulled out the ring, the massive emerald-cut diamond she had returned when they arrived at the hospital. Then we negotiate a new contract, Dante whispered, holding the ring up to the light. Terms lifetime duration, no exit clause, full partnership. He looked into her eyes, his walls finally crumbling. Sienna Moretti, will you marry me? For real? Sienna smiled, leaning down to press her forehead against his. Deal, she whispered. Outside the city was cold, but inside the fire was just getting started. And just like that, the waitress became the queen. Sienna didn't just survive the world of the Valentis. She conquered it not with a gun, but with a courage that even the Don couldn't ignore. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If you were offered $5 million to walk away from the love of your life, could you do it? Or would you tear up the check just like Sienna did? This story reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the guy with the gun. It's falling in love with the person who holds it. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more twisted romances, mafia secrets and dramatic betrayals, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a part. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Lucia was right to use them as bait, or did she go too far? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.